Okay. So one thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about today is that this business of waking up and this business of experiencing your true nature is particularly difficult because for human beings, we've only known the character that we're playing in this drama. We've only known the character that we're playing in this drama. Rupert Spira uses a very useful metaphor to talk about these things, and he uses the metaphor of King Lear and John Smith to talk about waking up, in terms of saying that the metaphor works to see it in the sense that John Smith is an actor, and he plays King Lear in the play, and he's a good actor, and because he gets so into the role of King Lear that he forgets who he is. And so after the play is over and he goes into his ordinary life, he continues to experience himself as King Lear and see what's going on around him from the viewpoint of King Lear. So he's kind of stuck in the play and stuck in the role. And a friend of his, when he's talking to his friend and expressing himself as King Lear, his friend tells him, no, you're mistaken. You're not King Lear. That's just the role that you play as an actor. And gradually he comes to see that that's the case and comes out of it, and it begins to experience himself as John Smith. And Rupert uses this as a metaphor to describe how it is for us, that we're playing this role of being a person in the world, and we're living in this play called our lives. And this play is a drama. And we're struggling in this drama to find peace and to find happiness and to resolve the circumstances that we find ourselves in. However, one thing about it that Rupert doesn't necessarily point out is that there's a difference between that metaphor and the way it goes for us in life. Because in the metaphor, John Smith was John Smith before he became King Lear. He was an actor who learned how to be King Lear and to act out the role of King Lear. However, for us, we only learn the role, right? And we only learn the role, and we are playing the role of the person all of our lives for decades, for a lot of us, for decades and decades. And so not only did we learn the role, but our brains were conditioned to be the role, to see the role as the truth, and to see our lives as a real drama. And so we've been in the play, so to speak, for our entire lives as the actor. And we didn't know anything else. We didn't know ourselves to be anything else. And so in that regard, it can be more difficult than the metaphor shows us. On the other hand, at the same time, you could say, well, we didn't know ourselves other than being the actor, right? But then there's this other aspect of it, and that is that even though we didn't know ourselves other than being in the role, At the same time, we do know ourselves, although that knowledge of ourselves has been something we've overlooked. So in a sense, we do know ourselves, but it's kind of like we've been John Smith all along, but we have not paid any attention to that. We've had all our attention preoccupied with being the character in the play. So, you know, these things are quite challenging. I mean, they're so challenging that for most of humanity, the attraction or the appeal or the interest in the possibility of experiencing who we really are, it doesn't even register as anything that would be given any attention. So you could say really that if you are here, if you are interested, if you are attracted to the message and to this possibility, that the understanding of yourself as your true nature as John Smith has begun to occur. And as I was sharing earlier, once the recognition is had, once you see the possibility, even if it's a moment, once you see the possibility, there's a period in which there's maybe a sense of relief, or there's this kind of honeymoon experience of pleasurable sensations, maybe seeing life differently, feeling that there is hope. And then things for most people can get worse because the brain and the mind are now in conflict with this insight. The brain and the mind are now in conflict with this possibility, because according to the brain and the mind, this possibility represents the death of the person, represents the end of the existence of the person. And so it is registered by the mind and the brain as a threat. And you know, that this is often referred to in a negative context, in the sense that some teachers talk about this in terms of the mind as the enemy. You know, the mind is going to attack what you're doing. But in reality, the mind is not the enemy. The mind is neutral. The programming in the mind and the programming in the brain are neutral. They're just as neutral as the programming on your computer. The programming on your computer doesn't have awareness. It just does what it does, right? And the programming in the mind and the brain doesn't have awareness. It just does what it does. And so it'll continue to do what it does. And one of the things that makes it particularly challenging is not only does that manifest itself in thought, and those thoughts attract your attention, but it also manifests itself in emotions, and that may be more challenging than even the thoughts. You see, because when you are feel overwhelmed with emotion, whether it be anger, fear, grief, sadness, despair, frustration, that emotion has a very strong, energetic impact. So that even if you have an understanding that these emotions and these thoughts are an expression of a mistaken identity, or an expression of the idea that you're a separate, limited self, even if you have an understanding of that, when the emotions arise and they're intense, that can easily overtake you. It can easily overtake your understanding, so that you find yourself in a position where you could say, intellectually, I understand what the case is, but it doesn't seem that way. That's the emotional aspect of it. It doesn't seem that way. If I understand that that's the case, why am I still so upset? Why? Because these emotions are part of the programming. The emotion of fear, for example, is part of the programming, that if you feel threatened, fear is the energetic force that comes up that has you either run or attack. It's the energetic force that comes up. So, we're fortunate because even though this is challenging, it's challenging because even if you wake up, even if you experience the truth of yourself, your true nature, even if you actually experience that with consistency, right, you still have to go into the role that you are playing as a person in the world. Can you see that this is difficult? Because you still have to be in the role, you still have to act accordingly, you still have to act like a father to your children, a husband to your wife, an employer to an employee to your employer. You still have to act as a person, even though you may be experiencing the truth of yourself. So you see that it's so easy for that to come back in and dominate your experience. But we're fortunate, more fortunate than ever, because we now have understandings from science in terms of the understandings and about the brain and how the brain works that are very consistent with the understandings that come from the ancient teachings about how the brain works. As far as we call these neural patterns now, right? We call these neural patterns now. In the ancient teachings, they called them vasanas. Same thing as a neural pattern. Vasana is an impression that exists in the brain, that impression, when it's triggered, replays. Okay? They're also called sankharas. So, but we're fortunate now because we have science that is consistent with these understandings and these wisdom teachings. That's why the Dalai Lama each year meets with physicists and psychologists to try and share back and forth to come up with an integrated approach to being human. And we're also fortunate because we have, there's actually a technology now, a kind of technology that's available for us to use to deal with the challenge of escaping the tyranny of being stuck as a person. Some of that technology comes from the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, for example, who presented the idea of using self-inquiry as a technique, as a practice, self-inquiry as a technique to come out of the dream. And so, and meditation, to use in the Zen approach, for example, meditation is used as a technique to come out of the dream, to sit still, silently to sit still, and to pay attention in such a way that you see things as they are. So the practice itself is the practice of paying attention in such a way that what you've been ignoring begins to be seen. Right? So ignorance, in this approach, through using meditation, ignorance comes to an end. You stop ignoring what there is to be seen. And so these techniques are very important for us. They give us a way to deal with the hypnotic state. They give us practices that we can use, and to understand and deepen our understanding of these practices is very important. For example, in In self-inquiry, the idea of self-inquiry is to continually investigate what's occurring, in the sense that when thoughts arise or feelings arise, you train yourself to pay attention in such a way that when thoughts and feelings arise, you can look at them and ask, for whom are these thoughts and feelings arising? If they're arising for the limited separate self, then that's no longer a thought that you follow. It's no longer a feeling that you allow to dominate your experience. And the idea being is that if you practice this consistently, it will weaken the illusion of being a separate self, being a person. Because the idea of being a separate self and a person, since it is not real, right, it has to be generated. This is an important thing to understand. Since it doesn't actually exist, it has to constantly be generated, and the way it's generated is through the thought process. It's generated through the thought process, and the way the thought process generates it is it has whatever is occurring through the senses be claimed by this illusion. So it's using what's happening to infer its existence. And when you pay attention and you separate it from that, right? In other words, the thought occurs, and when the thought occurs, there is an inference that that's my thought. That's the acclaiming, that's my thought. When you see it for what is and you separate this I thought from what's occurring, it loses its ability to maintain its existence because it depends on being associated with what's happening to infer that it's real. Do you follow this? It loses its ability to maintain its existence because it uses what's happening to infer that it's real. And when you pay attention and you're using this technique of self-inquiry, you're separating this I thought from the circumstances that it's using to infer that it's real. And when that separation occurs consistently, the I thought cannot maintain itself. It loses its energy because it's getting its energy from the idea that you identify with the thoughts and the feelings as being my thoughts and my feelings. It's using that. When you take that away and you isolate this illusion, in isolation it can't continue to exist. It needs to be associated with something in order to maintain the inference that it's real. And so this is a technique, this is a technology, so to speak, of waking up.
Would that be reprogramming the brain?
Yes. Yes, because there's basically two steps here. One is, the first step is the recognition that you're not who you thought you were. That's the first step, right? Now that first step in the beginning can be a conceptual understanding. It's possible to have a conceptual understanding that I'm not who I thought I was. And that's possible because you can engage in a conversation with somebody who sees this clearly and may be experiencing this consistently, and they can show you that there's no evidence for the existence of this person, this illusion. There's no evidence. They can show you. You know, in Buddhist traditions, part of the process of becoming a teacher or a senior monk is to actually debate with newer monks about the truth. Right? And this debate process is utilized for the monk to see that the arguments that keep the idea of a person real can't hold up. When faced with the evidence, they can't hold up because there is no evidence for this illusory self. There is no evidence. It can't hold up. So, In the beginning, there may be a conceptual understanding of this, but what will make the difference is that when you move from that conceptual understanding to a direct perception, when you move from that conceptual understanding, when you're actually seeing yourself, when you're actually seeing awareness, then the conviction is based on a direct experience, not just a conceptual understanding. The conceptual understanding will have difficulty being maintained, right? And when it comes into conflict with the way the mind presents things and the way the thought process occurs. But a direct experience of it is an experience where there is an unquestionable conviction. You see, I'm actually experiencing seeing awareness. There's an unquestionable conviction that it's real. And essentially all that is the idea that you're recognizing that that awareness exists, that awareness is real. And when you have that direct recognition, it's actually not you as a person seeing awareness, it's awareness seeing itself. And then there is a conviction that's unquestionable. So then after that conviction that's unquestionable, the process begins in which the reconditioning of the brain and the mind has to follow. And so this reconditioning process will be a process where thoughts present themselves that come from the system, the program of the idea that you're a separate finite self. Feelings come from the program that you are a finite separate self. And that will continue to challenge your conviction. And so you have to pay attention in such a way where you're recognizing the process that keeps generating the illusion. You're recognizing the process that keeps generating the illusion so that you can see through it. It's insubstantial. It's not real. It's a dream. You can see through it. You can see it as it is. You can see things as they are. And as you continue to see things as they are, you're not tricked. You're not fooled. You don't buy it. You don't follow these thoughts. You don't follow these feelings. You begin to hesitate when these feelings and thoughts arise, and you begin to be able to express the love and the reality of the actual awareness that you are. So there's this transition that occurs, but at the same time there's this transition that's occurring, as they say in many of the teachings, when you get to the other shore, right? The other shore being the completion of the process when you're fully realized, right? When you get to the other shore, you realize that nothing happened. That the transition didn't really happen because you were never ever anything but the self. This is a higher understanding of the whole thing, you know. It's what Rupert says in terms of using the metaphor with John Smith, that it was always John Smith. That even when, and this can be useful to you when you're going through this, even when you're completely lost in thought, completely lost in the identity that you're the body and you're the person and you're in the drama, even when that's the case, right? You are still nothing but the self. There is nothing but the self. Even when that's the case, there's nothing but the self. This is one of the reasons why I say that even in my own experience, that even when the thoughts and the emotions are intense, and what's playing, right, is intense in terms of the attraction or the pull to it, so much so that I'm actually in the illusion, right? But even in the illusion, there is an awareness of who I am. I don't know if that makes any sense, right? Even in the illusion, there's an awareness of who I am. So the reconditioning is not complete, but in a sense it is complete, because if I can know who I am, even in the middle of the drama, even in the middle of the illusion, even in the middle of my anger, even in the middle of my sadness, even in the middle of my despair, even in the middle of my tendency to act consistent with these things that are not actually true, even in the middle of all that, if I still know the truth,
And then you got to being the person at that point, right? Makes sense?
well, yes and no, you see.
Sorry, what did you say?
He said, then you're being the, right?
Yes, then when that happens, you're being the person. I mean, you're in mental awareness, you are awareness. But when you get into anxious, angry, caught up, you're actually being the person.
Yes. You're being the person, but you know you're being the person.
Right.
It's kind of like you're crazy, but you know you're crazy, so you're not crazy. You see? It's like a catch-22, right?
Isn't that the purgatory we're kind of talking about, where you come, in a sense?
Well, yes and no, because it's more purgatory when you're being the person and you don't know you're being the person and you're suffering. But when you're being the person and you know you're being the person, right? There's either no suffering or very little suffering, because you're still, your feet are still on the ground. You know, you still know what's true, right? And then I look at this for myself, and then I can say that there are still times, but there are moments. There are still times when I may totally lose the awareness of the truth of myself, right? But those are moments. And there's a lot of gratitude about that, because I can look back and remember, right, when that was my life. Those moments were my life. So when you see that, there's a tremendous amount of gratitude. Okay. Well, I hope that you continue to develop an understanding of these methods that can be utilized, to crack the case and to get out of the illusion, and that you trust and maintain the truth and practice that as consistently as possible so that you can experience what's possible. Okay, see you next time.